Where do you see the sport today? Questions we have to tackle in the future. There's a lot to unpack there. How this was a real hobby sport there.
This is a sport that is in an unbelievable stage of evolution.
Why we do this here is because we love horses. We love the sport there. Welcome to the NGP Trials and Tribulations series. I am here today with the co-founder of Brook Wealth Management, and I think it's safe to say one of the biggest supporters of the sport of show jumping in terms of your role on the board of the United States Equestrian Federation, United States Equestrian Team, the Hampton Classic Horse Show, and now the chairman of the Lake Placid Horse Show and really driving its push to the future, Philip Richter. Thanks for being on with us.
Thanks, Andrew.
So my question for you as we get going here is, as a member of a legacy family through your family's Coker farm, where do you see the sport today? I guess the positive, the questions we have to tackle in the future, and your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. This is a sport that is in an unbelievable stage of evolution. So if you think about the sport in the 70s and 80s, the sport was really a hobby, right? It was something fun that people did. Yes, there was the Olympics. Yes, there was money involved. Horses started changing hands in the mid 80s for real money. My mother, sold the first $100,000 junior hunter, which back then was
Unbelievable, yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge amount of money. Catherine Bertzel won the World Cup on the natural that Paul Greenwood bought for $1 million back in 1987. So there's always been a business aspect to it, but really the last 7-8 years, you've seen this incredible uptick in the sport globally.
Yes.
Here in the States, but globally. And I saw a lot of the data through my board seat on the USEF and seeing, the number of horse registrations, the number of competing entrants, the number of people filing for FEI access, all these things. And I think that's a very difficult transaction for any hobby to morph into a business. And there's examples of other things in the world that have happened like this, but now regulation is even more important than ever, right?
So.
Standards of safety, right? Fair play, horse welfare. All of these things are more and more important. They were always important, but now they're really important. The public eye is on it, is watching everything we're doing. The money is so big. The stakes are higher. So I think, to really answer your question, I think it's in a process that is really difficult. And now we're getting horse show management teams that are sprouting up. You've got unbelievable amounts of capital spent at WEC up in Ocala. You have WEF upgrading their facilities. There's really an arms race now to provide the best possible venues. We're feeling it at Lake Placid, and we've done over $10 million of investments in the grounds there in the last year.
Oh, we went last year. You can see in 1 year's time the difference.
Yeah, and there are more. You're going to see more this year.
Yeah.
But you can't stand still. So the bar has been raised so much. The pressure is, and I was even thinking about competition the other day when we were watching that amazing Grand Prix Saturday night. I mean, what an unbelievable event of show jumping, kind of at its pinnacle right now at this moment. And when you looked around and you walked the course or even just watched, and you take yourself back to 1983 at WEF, when the Grand Prix were on the polo fields here, how heavy the rails were, how deep the cups were, and actually how big the jumps were back then.
Yeah.
Right? Like the jumps were big and didn't move. So you could hit a jump really hard. Very different horse you needed back then. I think a lot of the horses, Jet Run, Allegro, all these famous horses Rodney Jenkins showed, I don't know how they would do today. They'd have a very hard time with courses today because they're so delicate, so fine, and so careful. It's a completely different sport on a lot of levels. So the evolution is extreme. It's great to watch. It's incredible to see the growth of the sport. I'm really excited about the future of the sport. But with that comes a real difficulty governing it in a forward-leaning way that's thoughtful, that's good for competitors, that's good for spectators, that's good for owners, and most of all, that's good for horses.
Yeah. Right. You're spot on. You talk about how this was a real hobby sport there. And if you think about, the grassroots, like why we do this here is because we love horses. We love the sport there. And so there's always that hobby aspect that still exists in this year. And I think that what you talked about, the last, 7, 8 years, I would say even, you look at, we were just at this weekend at the Global Champions Tour in Miami, and you see how the sport has become so catered around the VIP experience. And I think, and on top of that, you even look at the products, the sponsors that are in this, and it's all designed to sell to the people in that one tent there. And the horse show is built around that, and how you're taking something that it was a real hobby, and you see where the prices of horses are today, and at the same time that there's no blue book value to it. You have a great, you understand cars as well as anybody in this. And
Yeah, it's parabolic. I would define the growth of the industry as parabolic, and I think there are parallels to other industries that have had similar. I mean, F1 is talked about a lot because back when Bernie Ecclestone was running F1, you know, the whole VIP experience, it was really about the cars and the racing and the passion. And then now you go to Miami F1 and it's the same thing. It's all about the VIPs, it's about the boxes, it's about the experience, the food, and the drivers, putting a lot of emphasis on making them heroes. And that's where I think our sport has incredible opportunity going forward, because not only do you have heroes and riders, but you have heroes and horses.
very much so.
You have literally both that can become, and we had a little bit of that in the 80s, right? Like Gem Twist became a nationally known phenom, right, with Greg Best. There were horses in history, Snowman, which they made the Disney movie about, right? There are famous horses in the past that became mainstream, but I think the future holds unbelievable potential for marketing that and getting more eyeballs on the sport.
I keep saying, when you look at this sport here, and there's already such a ingrained culture in horse racing, and I think that is something that, it's not America's pastime. I also think it's America's present there.
Yeah.
And you look at you look at culture here, and we're just talking about the States. I think there's an incredible opportunity on a global scale, and this is, this is a sport that I think can appeal all over the world. I think it already has to some extent there. And that's where I do credit where the global tour has really brought some of that to the forefront. But if you look at the sports that are really successful in America, it's something that has high intensity. Well, let's take one step back. There's strategy, there's high intensity, there's execution, and there's a break. So you look at football, you have the strategy of the play call, the high intensity execution of the play, and there's a break to discuss it. The same thing in baseball, the same thing in golf. And that's really what show jumping is. Yeah. And you add the horse element to it. It adds another layer.
They're also highly technical.
Yeah.
Which, football's technical. Almost every sport's technical. Have you ever tried to explain to someone who doesn't know anything about show jumping what's going on, the amount of math involved?
Oh,
right. Strides, control, distances, pace, position. I mean, all of these things are really hard to explain to people who don't know the sport.
No, very much so. And I think, and to that point there, which I think is really interesting about this, is I think you see such a push in investment into the space of sports in general right now. And I think that one of the things that we're doing in NGP is creating an avenue for that in the sport of show jumping, and a data set alongside that there. Because I think that, one thing that we talk about with the technical aspect and the detail there is that I think one of the reasons why there's been a real investment in sport is because I think it's something that is protected against I would say, the overall creep of AI into taking over an industry. That sport, in the end, AI can't actually produce the sport. It can enhance it there.
It's about athletes.
Yeah. And I think that and so it's interesting where I think that where I also see such an incredible future in the sport here is that if it's done the right way, there's so much opportunity because I think that the interest is going to follow that there.
Yeah, and it's an incredible moment because we are now an industry and the rest of it's catching up to that. And I think that's what we're going to see on the regulatory side, on the show management side, on the breeding side, which is really a whole I mean, we could have a whole hour talk to go down the rabbit hole of breeding, which is so fascinating in the sport. But I'm really excited about the future. I think I'm a little sad I'm aging out at 56 years old today, because I think the next 30 years are it's just going to be extraordinary.
It is a lifetime sport. You're still riding at the high amateur level. So it's
I do have to take a nap right after jumping in the high amateur classic. That didn't used to happen, but yeah, we're still there.
still in there. You see on many different levels. You see it at the horse show organization level there. But I think, and you see it through your role at Hollowbrook here. The amount of money that gets passed around in this, I wouldn't say passed around, the amount of money that moves around the sport today. And I think what's really amazing to me, so there is a Pegasus data set there that said 302 billion in revenue is generated through equestrian sport. Now, I think that I want to dive a little deeper into that on a different episode there. But regardless of what the final number is, it's a massive amount.
Yeah, either way, whatever the specifics are of the categories and the impacts, it's a huge number.
Yeah.
But I think, Andrew, even bigger than the size, more important than the size of the money that's transacting is the velocity at which it moves.
Yeah.
Right? So somebody sees a horse on YouTube, the price discovery process has completely been turned on its head by the internet, by YouTube, by instant videos, by instant communication. So it used to be, in the 70s and 80s, you would hear about a horse in Germany or Holland, and you'd know through your network, and you'd go see it, and there was a much slower moving ball. Now, that horse hits social media, it's on Instagram, and the world wants it, and all eyeballs are on it, and everyone flies to Holland at the same time, waiting in line to buy that horse.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a very different transaction. It's much more accelerated, it's instantaneous, and that brings a lot of risk.
Very much so.
Right? Which is something that NGP is actually addressing in your business model to a certain degree.
Yeah, we are. Well, I mean, so you look at what you could equate it to is you see a new company come on and they have one good day, and all of a sudden everybody's racing to buy that stock.
One good earnings call, and everyone's not. Yeah, that's happening in markets every day for sure.
And we look at, okay, how do we, we go back to the hobby aspect of this here, which is, we have riders that really, at the end of the day, what fuels the sport are the riders, the drive, the desire to engage in the level of horsemanship that actually produces what you see in the ring today.
Right.
And I think that alongside that, there is the need for horses, of course. And the one, we talk about, you go back to without diving so far into it you talk about the breeding aspect of it. Well, if we're looking at cars, you have an assembly line, you can increase production or decrease production and scale that to demand. And in this here, you're going back, the top horses now are probably 11 to 13 to 14 years old would be kind of their peak age there. And you have to think about how far back that horse was bred.
Yeah, and think about what happened, in the breeding world. If you talk to Paul Shakamo or you talk to any of the top breeders, the 2008 financial crisis was highly problematic for the equestrian world in breeding.
Yeah.
Right. So breeding just plunged. Given the illiquidity and the whole nature of the global financial crisis. So we had a real, almost a pig in the python situation where there was nothing following the breedings that happened in 05, 06, 07. And then suddenly there was a cliff.
Yeah.
And that actually had a big impact, 10 years down the road.
Oh, we're still feeling it today.
It's using that feeling today.
It's those horses, it's the offspring of those horses that were bred. And so you see that we still have less supply than we did, and we have the demand is through the roof, which is why there is incredible financial opportunity in this if it's harnessed the right way. I think where this sport is alienated so many people over time is because horses can have, I think that it's almost like that explosive valuation there.
Yes.
Is that this industry, to a large extent, is designed to squeeze money out of those that have it to harness that explosive valuation, and profit opportunities are skirted around them. And I think that that's where you've seen, in a way, there's this massive expansion of the sport at the high level, but I feel like to some extent beneath that, it's a bit of that's a runaway train from what's the reality here, and there's a real contraction in that.
Yeah.
And I think going back to what are ways that there is there's one side of it where there's real opportunity. The second side is how can we support the sport the right way for the future there, and that's managing the risk around it there. But I think that it's there's so many components of why we're here today. I think there's real opportunity, like you said, but it needs to be managed the right way.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing it's a little bit off point here, but I think it should be said, running horse shows, like we analyze businesses all day at Hollowbrook, right? There are very few businesses that are as difficult to execute with a margin that's reasonable of profitability than horse shows.
Yeah.
So we see this at Lake Placid. I see it at the Hampton Classic. You see it here at WEF. You see it everywhere. And the difficulty in running these shows is that there's what we would call in the financial world high operating leverage. In other words, there's a lot of expenses you have that are happening no matter if you have 500 horses or 1,000. Those expenses have to happen.
Yeah.
So when you add another 200 horses, that's all profit, incremental profit. Yet you don't want to dilute your experience and not have people come back because it's too crowded. The show goes into the dark night hours. So I think what a lot of horse show managers have done, which I think is great for the business, is a lot of these lower level classes that bring the hobbyist back into the sport, right? So your, low adult jumpers, the
0.65,
the master,
the master, yeah.
right? It's getting older people back in the sport. It's getting, lower level of jumps, but those people are having a great time.
Yeah.
Right. And they're paying trainers. They're helping the sport grow. There's more enthusiasm. It's a broader base of support. And I think that show management has done a good job in helping bolster profitability of these shows by having a great menu for people who are not showing Saturday night under the lights with Ken Farrington and Laura Kraut and yourself and all these people, right? So we're going in the right direction. It's just how do you continue that in a way that's safe? Yeah, right. In a way that's good for horses, the schedules, the frequency of shows. I mean, look at the show calendar. I mean, who would have ever thought? I mean, back in the day when Norman De La Gioia won 5 Grand Prix on my mom's horse, Johnny's Pocket, in 1 year, I think there were 7 Grand Prix in the United States that year total. Right, and that was 1981. That was a long time ago, but it wasn't like 100 years ago.
Well, remember when they started the North American Riders Group, one of the big goals was to try to get an FEI horse show in between the American Invitational and the Hampton Classic. Right. Look at where we are now.
And look where we are now. So look at how far we've come. And that's why I bring up horse show management, because I think they are a little bit unsung heroes in the way the horses evolve, because they're taking a lot of risk to put on a show. Like, when Lake Placid starts, like we all take a big gulp of air. Yeah. And there's a lot of hope that people come, that people show a lot, that we get margin, that the thing can survive. And that's a 2-week not-for-profit show. So obviously the industry's moved much more towards series shows where you've got Michigan that runs all summer. You've got the shows up in New York State at HITS. Yeah. You've got WEC, you've got WEF.
All can amortize the cost throughout as long as you're
economies of scale. And then you also have professional management that all they do is run horse shows, where these shows like Devon, Hampton Classic, Old Salem, Lake Placid, these are being run by people like me who are not full-time horse show managers, right? So there's like a lack of expertise or focus. And that's what makes a good business. So I think, yes, there's a lot to complain about inside the sport. The footing's not good, the jump quality, bad course designing, whatever it is. But I think if everyone just would take a step back and say, wow, how lucky are we now that there are horse shows, you can choose where you want to go. And then you get into Europe and it gets even crazier, right? So like if you don't want to show in the US in the summer, you can fly your horse to Europe, and it's literally an oyster of opportunity. Of places to go that are beautiful. So I think this is all key. If you look at F1, what they've done, the number of F1 races are growing, the quality, we're following that playbook. And I think that's all really good for the sport. And I think competitors should be supportive of horse show management and critical where they need to be, but at the same time realizing if they were in those shoes, this ain't an easy business to run. At all.
For sure.
So,
and
we should just touch.
I think it's so important there. And I think because all these things really play, they tie together there. I think that you see the experience, and, I think the experience that horse shows offer starts to become very competitive. And at the end of the day, it's the exhibitors that benefit the most from it there. And I think, that we see the rate of growth on a global scale. We talk about, you talk about the first $100,000 junior hunter, and then you talk about the first $1 million horse there, and now you see the valuations of horses that well exceed 10 million, and which is and that's almost common practice now.
So the downside to that though is that a lot of people are getting shut out of the sport. It's a joke now, but like being a mere millionaire kind of isn't enough anymore at that level. Okay, there's a lot of things you can do at the grassroots level of the pony club and regional levels and have a lot of fun. But if you really want to show Saturday night under the lights, that's why, again, back to NGP, very interesting. There's a lot of people trying to solve some of these problems in different ways, right? And I think it's great that there are people dedicated to this in different sections. I mean, you've got the USCT Foundation raising money for high performance. That's the here and now. That's the Olympics in 2028 and on home turf in LA. So what you're doing, there's other organizations helping even younger riders. There has to be help here to get a leg up for a lot of these next generation riders, because there is a scenario where, the Olympics after LA, who's going to be our athletes, right? And who's going to be productive, supporters of the sport and heroes in the future. And I think there's a really positive flywheel, getting back to horse shows and horse show management, this positive flywheel that everyone keeps offering more.
Yes.
And what that requires is a competitive dynamic where every horse show manager has to say, well, wow, I did a $100,000 Grand Prix last year. I got to do 125 now, because it inches its way up, which means then sponsors' ears prick up. And then they need to be tapped even more. And then it becomes more normal. I mean, we've got Rolex, we've got, McNeil is sponsoring at WeatherTech. I mean, if you drive out of the horse show at WEF, and you look at each week's sponsors, which, by the way, I think is brilliant, the way they do that when you drive as a sponsor, and they're all significant businesses. I mean, Bainbridge, huge apartment complex company. There's lots of first-class, top-tier sponsors, and those sponsors are enabling us to go to the next level. On top of that, you have even the federation stepping in, saying this U.S. Open series that they're doing, they're putting money into prize money to up it and get more eyeballs on the USCF network, on television, on live stream, about the horse, about the rider, about the team, about the groom, the whole thing. And I'm really excited. Like when you drive out of WEF and you see all those sponsors in a row. When I started coming to WEF in 1979, like it was a country fair or day show, right? It was like there was nothing like that going on. There was Mercedes-Benz was an early sponsor at the AGA level, and that was really exciting. But that was for the 5 Grand Prix, and that was it. So anyway, I'm just very positive, enthusiastic about it. It's just, I think the challenge is, how do you manage this? How do you manage young riders that are struggling to get a leg up? How do you manage sourcing horses at any price, right? How do you manage horse welfare, that people aren't doing bad things? Because there are people who do bad things, and they need to be monitored and punished if they do something wrong that's not good for the sport. So it's not going to be easy, right?
What the horse shows are offering there, the full experience is attached to that there. You see, I think the flip side to that there, which is where I think we really have to tackle this head on there, is that there's a real individual experience that's been created. And so a horse show, the sport, we've created this experience for somebody to go and take a part individually there. And I think that is great, and that's very important there. And I think that now we talk about, he said, it's like almost, we say, okay, well, it's not just about being a millionaire anymore, is that you need significant funds in order to support this year as a rider. But where I think there's a real opportunity in that there is how we've said, okay, this is an alternative investment that's tied to an experience, that you can actually go to a competition and you compete yourself. You have a family member that competes themselves there. And now
part of something,
and you're a part of something. You could have 15 to 20 horses that are competing there any given weekend there, and you're a part of. You're not just there for you're there for your own experience. But you're there for something bigger than that. And if we can also deliver an investment that it creates a positive return, you're accomplishing a lot of things at once.
And it's different, but this has been done before in different ways in the past in horses. I mean, racehorse syndicates have been around forever, right? It's different, but it's conceptually similar, right? And that's about the experience, right? But owning a piece of something that's exciting, whether it's patriotic because it goes to the Olympics or it wins the World Cup, or even if it just shows in a class on Sunday in ring 10 at WEF, that it's moving its way up in the right way with a good trainer, a good rider, a good program. That's something that people want to be a part of. And we're seeing that. I mean, we have some of the greatest owners in this sport right now. You look back in history, like F. Eugene Dixon, who owned all Michael Matz's horses. You had Charlie Dolan owned a lot of great horses. You had these amazing titans of American businesses who loved the sport and supported it. That's continued in a very positive way. I mean, we could always use more supporters,
for sure.
But if you stop and look around at the people who are supporting riders and what they're doing, it's super exciting.
That was very exciting.
And to your point, you don't need to own the horse. You could own parts of horses. You could do, what NGP is doing, and there's other things that other people are doing too in that way. And some of it's by necessity because you just can't afford to do it any other way.
And I think what we're trying, you see so much, and this goes into the discussion about what, I think the immediacy need of riders and the risk associated with it there is that I think there's a lot of ways to support riders. It's one thing to say, okay, we're just going to get investment behind them there and get horses underneath them. But it's mentoring, but it's like, how are you doing it there? Because you see that you talk about the big rush for, the horse that somebody sees tomorrow there. And I think one of the things that's really important for us there is that, there's, like we went outside the industry when we started NGP and we said, how do people view horses? And it was high risk, a lot of bills, and a lot of transparency. And I said, okay, they're spot on. But now it's our role within the industry just to fix that there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. It's almost like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
So if you look back at how the USET used to function as the U.S. Equestrian Team, now it's a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But in Gladstone, New Jersey, at that incredible building, right, there were apartments above the barn, and people like Norman Delajoyo and Michael Matz and Ann Krasinski and all the Leslie Burr Howard, all these people lived there. Bert Denemeth would match them to horses and make them and mentor them and train them and get them to be to the levels of the Olympics. And it would be a really organic thing where each rider got paired with the right horse, and it was Bert's decision what happened, and there was a ton of mentoring, a ton of learning, a ton of mistakes made. And in a way, that's also the future. There needs to be mentoring from professionals to the next generation, because horses are complicated, right? It's a very tough, difficult sport, and experience matters. Gray hair matters.
It does. And well, no, sorry, what you just before we jump forward, is that you just touched on something so important there, which is the matching of the horse and rider.
Yeah.
And I think that's also
everyone tries to do that every day.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you got to find a match.
And whether it's for sport purposes or financial purposes, like real value is created in the horse rider match. And that's everything that we're trying to do from NGP is create, because I think there's been people that have tried to put investment groups together, but it's usually focused around one rider. And what's really neat for us is that we've got, you've got a group of sources that I think exceed something that we've seen in the sport today, in terms of the amount of people that are working together to source the horses, and then the menu, like you said, of the riders to choose from there. And that's where real value is.
And they're meshing them, not dissimilar to what Bert was doing in New Jersey 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And produced, by the way, like if you look at the riders that were produced out of that program, it's astounding. And many of them are still going around the ring.
Yeah. And making
incredible.
And I think, and again, that's just one more, I think, thing that's so neat about our sport there is that, you normally are talking about one athlete, and you're trying, maybe you're trying to pair a wide receiver with a good quarterback, I guess. But in this case, you're actually trying to pair a rider and a horse together, and the success that they can create. And, the thing is, I look around our room when we meet with all of our riders there and say, like, I know each one of you can ride this horse.
Right.
Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be in the room with us here. But is this the best horse rider match? And that's where there's,
that's a judgment call based on experience.
Yeah.
But, the positive flywheel, I think of it, as that famous book, Good to Great, about the positive flywheel, is that, whether it's NGP or other entities, organizations, like it's all evolving, right? Like we're adjusting to what the sport is becoming, and we're going to be making changes to help be competitive in the future and help the sport. And I think it's great. And it's just another example of how exciting the opportunity is, because there's potentially way more investment that could come into the sport.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd go off on a ledge, but I think the next 10 years in the sport, I mean, are going to be so explosive beyond our wildest dreams. Right.
Hmm.
And,
I agree.
and if you don't have, a process like NGP, or you don't have money being raised for teams, and you don't have, uh, help for very talented but underfunded riders, um, it's going to be hard, right? It's the era of Michael Matz, right? Like, the story, he
Yeah.
was riding a lawnmower literally, and Vince Dugan's rider fell off and got hurt, and Michael got on the horse, and he turned out to be a savant. Like, and met F. Eugene Dixon, and there it went. Like, that's harder and harder today, right? And so there needs to be support networks to help people,
Yeah.
and source all that, and match horses to riders. And so I think all of this is exciting for the future, and it's going to be helpful to a greater or lesser degree.
For sure. You see today so many of the, I guess, the icons of the sport are, and that have been the timeless professionals. We talk this a lifetime sport here that were created out of what the USCT created at Gladstone there.
Yeah.
So the word I come back to then is sustainability, because it's one thing to create something one time, but how do you make it sustainable there?
So with a steepening curve of
Yeah,
difficulty, right?
yeah.
That's the hard part, because it's not static.
I think what's really unique about Hollowbrook is that you bring in an experience level of whether it's competitive, high intensity competition, or a hobby interest in not just an equestrian aspect here, but I'd say hobbies of interest to high net worth families, and I think, and also professionals within the sport there. How what would how do you view sustainability and really making a financial plan around engagement in the sport here?
Yeah, I mean, we're so fortunate at Hollowbrook to work with some of the top people in the sport, both at the training level,
Hmm.
right, and at the owner level, and at the actual competitor
Yeah.
level. So we have a very diverse client base that is very involved with the sport. So having domain expertise is very helpful to help make what literally is an asset allocation decision. So
Yeah.
if you think about a portfolio, you have treasuries, you have stocks, bonds, credit funds, venture capital, private equity,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. But horses are a whole category in unto themselves in someone's life. And it's
Yeah.
not just the investment in the horse, but it's managing the ongoing costs in a holistic way in their financial life, to be able to not be interrupted by things going on in the world and the market. So that means having a lot of liquidity,
Hmm.
right? Having investments that pay tax efficient distributions. And then it's really keeping an eye on downside risk,
Yeah.
right? The risk of catastrophic loss,
Yeah.
which happens in the horse world now that there's a lot more sophisticated insurance. Catastrophic loss is limited if your horses are insured. But at Hollowbrook, we really think about the holistic client situation. And with horses, again, it's one thing to buy a horse. It's another thing to keep it on the road,
Yes.
to fund that, and to manage that.
Yeah.
And so we have a whole family office services group that literally, like, we know what our clients' horses are doing down to the horse. Like, we can track expenses to the very single horse. And in certain families that have lots of horses, that's super helpful, right? So
Yeah.
we know exactly what you're spending on each horse. Maybe you see, and then we can do analytics on what are farrier costs doing, which we all know are going up
Yes.
very dramatically. But I think it's important to have a financial partner in your equestrian journey, because the financial side of it, you don't want the tail wagging the dog, but you got to pay attention to the numbers. At
Yeah.
some point, you got to say no to certain things, or make decisions and say, instead of, two made Grand Prix horses, I'm going to buy 4 younger horses,
Yeah.
and we're going to bring them along. And that's a different business plan. And we can help model that business plan and talk about the risks and the upside and the downside, and what that's going to cost hypothetically in a model driven environment. So we love, working with families, individuals, trainers, officials in the horse show world, and we learn a lot from them.
Yeah.
Right? We learn a lot from them, and we try to do the best we can and have investments that are durable in a very, very uncertain world.
Yeah.
As we're speaking right now, it's a very uncertain situation.
And we're coming down to the hour about what's
We are
happening.
literally coming down to the hour. And so there's no way to predict these outcomes today. And there's so many inputs that really what our clients want to do is be able to live their lives. So if you
Yeah.
think about your health and you think about your wealth, we're there to protect and grow your wealth, with protect being before growth. It's a very important point. Protect and grow capital, and make sure that people's lives aren't interrupted because the market moved down 30%.
Yeah.
And that's in the horse show world. You can't just stop feeding your horses, right?
Exactly.
You just can't. So
Yeah, you can put the car in the garage and say, I'll wait a little bit.
yeah, I'll leave it or drive it, right? But with horses, it's so different. So we take our role very seriously, and it's an important role to keep the wheels turning. Yeah, in a thoughtful way.
So we're doing something. We're trying to make your life a little bit easier. It's not going to take away that there's still a big job to do there. But, one of the things I think that is so difficult in this, we're talking about supporting a rider, regardless of a family's financial background there.
Yep.
It's just, I think I had a great, right where we're sitting years ago, I had a family come and sit down with me, and they had a son who was just started jumping meter 10. And they said to me, would it be possible for him to jump a 2-star Grand Prix well in 2 years? And I kind of sat back and I was like, yeah, it's possible there.
Yeah.
And they said, okay. They said, if capital were no question, and understanding that capital is twofold, there's financial capital and there's time capital. If that was there, and they said, we probably aren't going to be able to do this here, but if capital is of no concern, what would it take to get to that point? Like, what would be the absolute roadmap? And they said, then we're actually, they said, then we understand what the best case scenario roadmap would be. And then we understand what we're giving up in the process there, or what decisions we have to make. And for me, that was actually, as a trainer, that was a really helpful exercise. But I go back to, like, how can we create predictability then, to some extent there? Because you need horses underneath riders there. I always say the more you can be investing in draft picks, you're hopefully not at a position where you're having to, go out in free agency. I'm a big football fan, so I relate a lot back to that there, but get a position of need. But one of the things that we're trying to do through NGP is that understanding that horses do come with risk, but we're looking at this is that this is a diversified investment portfolio, and so that NGP is taking the individual risk on any one horse there, but it's part of let's say there's 20 horses in a tranche at one time there. But then when a horse is matched to a rider there, now if a rider has let's say they have a shot to buy one horse there, you're talking about a 20-minute trial, possibly 2 20-minute trials if they're lucky there. Sometimes the second trial can confuse a rider more than help, and a 20-minute clinical exam. And you think about the amount, the decision that has to be made after that time frame there. And so what we're trying to do, helping to de-risk that, is that when riders take on a horse there, regardless of if they have investment themselves in the fund or not, they have access to a horse. They now get that horse in their stable for a period of 6 months. They understand the partnership. They understand the whole program on the horse.
Yep.
They understand, they get to compete the horse in multiple venues. They understand the veterinary aspect of it, and they have a set buyout on the horse there. And talk about level of predictability.
I think that's the really important point, is the set buyout.
Yeah.
Because, you have this runaway potential hockey stick if the horse starts jumping clear rounds at meter 50.
Yeah.
Then everyone's at the table, and then the rider's sitting there saying, I can't afford this horse that I'm sitting on.
Yeah. I mean, if you really look at it there, so it's the rider has the ability to have the horse secured on their behalf for 150% of the principal value within the first 6 months. And if you were to say, if I were to tell you from your investment firm that you would make a 50% return on an investment within 6 months, I think you probably are pretty happy with that there.
Yeah. And I mean, the option value, in investments, when you think about puts and calls and options and straddles, it's actually very, very much a similar concept.
Yeah.
Right? Where I hate to say this, but on the downside, you have horses insured,
Yes.
right? So your loss is limited by insurance.
Yeah.
Your upside is profit is capped, and that's still a nice profit, but it's also great for the rider, or the owner, right? To be able to afford the horse at that price, which may or may not be, the next top horse.
Well, and I think that by the time somebody's buying that horse, I go back to, I had one, a great supporter of mine say, he always talked about the difference between wholesale price and retail price on a horse there. And so if you think about, hopefully we're doing our job, our fiduciary responsibility to be buying horses at good value to begin with there. And so, let's call that the wholesale value on a horse there. And when the rider needs to usually get a horse there, they're buying it at retail price. And I think that when you talk about the reach of our network on the entry point of horses there, we're getting in at a good entry point. And then I think for the rider, if you really look at it, that if the horse is that good, they want to have the horse after 6 months, it's probably gone up more than 50% in value. When you talk about the rate that horses can go up there. And I think that that's just a component of what we're doing. But I think the more predictable we can make this, where a rider understands, okay, that for investors, investment can be made. Riders who take on a horse,
You're limiting the unknowns.
buyout. Yeah.
Limiting the unknowns, which is good, because there's a lot of unknowns, and price is a big one.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So we got something kind of fun that I like to do in this here, and I want to do it actually from a Hollowbrook lens here.
Okay.
And so this is the Trials and Tribulations series, and I think we're always trying to learn in this. And I say, so talk about what's the greatest moment of your career, the hardest moment of your career, and what have you learned from each of them?
So I think, the greatest moment of my career really would be starting Hollowbrook, founding Hollowbrook as a co-founder, and that decision to pivot from working for a larger firm and going out on my own and starting a boutique firm.
Yeah.
And that moment of change was very, very seminal, and it was a big impact on my life, and it was a big risk. And it still is a risk. Every day is a risk. But, we were now over 22 years old as a firm. We have 21 employees. We manage about over $1.6 billion in assets, which is still boutique-y, big enough to have stature. And we have a great team of people. So when I think back to what was my, maybe greatest achievement, it was maybe having the courage to do that. Although working for, a big firm was great, resources, people, brains, horsepower, but building something on your own with purpose is to me what I think are, my greatest business achievement has been. There's been a lot of fun things along the way, certain investments in oil and gas projects that went our way by luck or by good fortune or by good process, or individual stock picks where we held out as long as we could because we believed in the business and the management, and then it did well. Patience pays in our business. Hard. Yeah, it's like a horse, right? That it's not jumping clear rounds, but you believe in them, and they start jumping clear rounds because you got the gymnastics figured out and you got your groundwork done. Right?
Yeah.
So, I think that would be really it. And I think what I'm really proud of too is we've really embraced how valuable women are in the wealth management business. And we've made a concerted effort to really invest in everybody at our firm, but also giving a lot of women the chance to rise up to the next level. And that means if, they're on maternity leave, or they're, they need flexible work schedule for their family. We're very, very open to that and supportive of that. And what it's returned has been fantastic, because people like to work in environments where they're respected, where they have flexibility. In fact, we found in most of the cases we get our employees working harder when they know that they're trusted and have that ability to pick up their kid at school, or go to that parent-teacher conference, or take more time off on a leave because of a sick child, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. And I think there's not a lot of in the wealth management space. It's much more dominated by males and females. And we've really shifted that in our firm, which I really enjoy. A horse thing, that I was most proud of.
Yeah.
So, this was very elusive. For many, many years, I wanted to win the Sunday Derby at the Hampton Classic. It was my goal. It used to be the biggest class of the year. I don't know, in the amateur. Yeah. I don't know what is today, probably the Devon Classic or down here. But back in 2012, 13, it was the class to win. And I had for years in the 90s, had the last jump down on the jump off with the fastest time, or I had, one rail in the first round, and and finally in 2013 I won the classic, and I had two horses in the jump off, and I thought Glasgow, Norton's old Grand Prix mount, would be the horse that would win, and it turned out Glasgow was great. I made a mistake, but the horse that won was this horse that I bought through Leslie Burr and my friend Debbie Pippins, who was very, very cheap. He was a little injured and a wonderful horse, but not really the horse that you would expect to win Sunday Hampton Classic. So it's really fun when an underdog horse,
100%.
His horse was named Ray Ray. He was wonderful. And it's really fun to win something that you've driven your whole life to win on the underdog horse.
Yeah.
Which I think is, how that feels. I mean, you've
100%.
done that many times. So that was sort of one of my favorite show jumping career wins of all time. It's really fun.
That's that class as a tough class. I did it one time when I was 19. We jumped off. I was one of three in the jump off. We jumped up to 3 4-fault rounds to show the difficulty of the class there.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, back then, which now it's no longer true because we went to all weather, you had a real water jump. I mean, like a 16-foot water. You had a real bank.
Yeah.
You had the dry ditches, the hedge ditches, which are pretty terrible.
Significant.
I had one horse that I bought from Russia that had such a short stride that I would have to do a 2-stride in the one because he couldn't get out in one. It was too long. And that was tricky.
I was walking the course one time, and they used to have the junior equitation class there, and hard and towel, we were walking the course with Missy Clark, and we got to the dry ditch, and it was on the back, the verticals on the back side of the dry ditch. And he goes, "Missy, how do they know when to leave the ground?" And she goes, "They just jump." And he goes, "But there's a hole in the." That was great.
That's funny.
You touched on something there, though, about your story with having kind of the underdog horse. And, I think what's so interesting about this, the one I was going to tie in on the investment side, is that, you say, okay, we've had, since we started NGP, we've had a lot of people reach out about, they bring the analytics to it there about, okay, this many clear rounds at Mirror 50 equals this valuation, their opinion there. And
right.
I say what's so interesting about this is that from an investment side of it, then this goes back to there's all the variables that go into the horse rider match here, where real value is created. Is that the technically what is the best horse is not necessarily the most valuable horse there.
That's so true.
And I look back, it's not taking, you think about, some of the horses that have traded for very significant sums, and what their resume was on paper, and it goes back to the fact that maybe that it's a lot of times the most valuable horses are the ones that the highest quality horse that the broadest range of individuals can ride.
Absolutely. Well, so it's interesting in in the investment world, we have a similar dynamic, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between the value of a company and the price at which it trades.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of Warren Buffett all day long. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if you even look at from 2007 to 2010, during the deepest part of the financial crisis, if you actually study the earnings of some very high quality businesses, stocks went down 35-40% because of lack of liquidity. But if you actually looked at quarter by quarter metrics like revenue growth, margin growth, dividend growth, in basic, key performance indicators, a lot of these companies continued to do really well during the financial crisis, but their price wouldn't reflect that. The price was down 45% and stayed down, yet earnings kept growing, dividends kept growing.
Mm-hmm.
Not dissimilar from that horse you just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Where, what's really the record. Right?
Yeah.
So it's fun. There's a lot of parallels between the investment world and show jumping, and that's maybe why I'm in both of them. I don't know.
I know. I say it's we're trying to do an alternative investment with an experience, not just a quarterly statement. Because there's a lot. There's something. There's a lot to that there, especially in this world now.
Yeah.
So
Well, if there's even a movement because of this trend, I think the administration is trying to move the SEC towards not having companies report quarterly, because we become so obsessed with quarterly earnings that it's driving a lot of short-term decisions that are actually poor capital allocations.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of thinking long-term about a business, it takes a long time to build a business. It's like you said, right? Horse might jump a great round once, but can it do it again? Or can it build, off of that? And so we'll see where that all goes. It's a fascinating time.
Yeah.
It's a great time to be alive.
100%.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming.